has a long and troubled history of fascination with the beautiful and deadly liquid metal mercury. Mercury is obtained from cinnabar deposits, which are found in places such as China, Serbia, Peru, California, and Alaska. The cinnabar is ground and heated with a reducing agent such as quicklime, and the liquid mercury evaporates and is collected in a condensing column. The cinnabar also yields vermilion, a red dye which has been used in arts and crafts for thousands of years and is also used as a food colouring. Evidence of mercury mining in South America, dating back to 1400 BC, has recently been found in the Andes Mountains of Peru. Even nearly 3,500 years ago, it was well known that the workers exposed to the toxic mercury fumes during mining and processing contracted tremors, became blind and deaf, and died from occupational exposure to this metal. Later, the Spanish colonists used the indigenous people to work the mines, and few are recorded to have survived for more than a few years. In fact, cinnabar and mercury were often inserted into Mayan and Egyptian royal burial chambers to deter vandals and thieves. Ultimately, the history of mercury is intimately tied with that of alchemy and the search for the secret elixir of immortality. Throughout history, many of the ruling elite have been involved in alchemy, and many may have unwittingly been poisoned by the mercury they used. Examples include Sir Isaac Newton, whose hair samples were recently analysed and showed 25 times the level of mercury considered normal, and King Charles II, who experienced personality changes late in life and death from kidney failure, and it is now thought likely that these were due to mercury poisoning. Probably the biggest case of mercury poisoning in the history of mankind involved Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China, who unified warring states under his control in 259 BC. He ordered the building of the Great Wall of China and the construction of a vast city which is now buried underground, which was intended to house him upon his death. The famous Terracotta Army is just one small part of this city that has been excavated. This walled city covered 55,000 square kilometres and included his palace, many other buildings, and a scale model of the Chinese Empire with its lakes and rivers made of flowing mercury. Many of the 700,000 labourers involved in this massive building project are believed to have lost their lives to mercury poisoning, and the remainder were either executed or walled inside the mausoleum so that they could not tell of the great riches held there. Obsessed with obtaining the secret elixir of immortality, the emperor sent ships to the corners of the world. When their search proved fruitless, he took mercury pills, since mercury was known to act as a preservative, and ironically died, aged just 49, of their effects. His great city, now underground, is still so toxic that it is too dangerous to excavate, even 2,000 years later. The Roman Empire too knew of the toxicity of mercury, and used to send slaves and convicts to work in their Spanish cinnabar mines, which was effectively regarded as being a death sentence. The man who is widely regarded as the father of medicine, Paracelsus, also described the symptoms of mercury poisoning in miners in Central Europe during the Renaissance. And in 1713, the Italian physician, Bernardino Ramazzini, was moved to found the discipline of occupational medicine after witnessing the great harm done to those exposed to mercury as part of their work. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, mercury-based compounds were used to treat pelts in the hatting industry. Known for their tremors and psychiatric illness, the term Mad as a Hatter arose, and was probably the inspiration for Lewis Carroll's Mad Hatter character in Alice in Wonderland. When it comes to environmental mercury poisoning, two of the most infamous examples took place in Japan. The first incident was in the 1950s in the small fishing village of Minamata. First animals and then humans were stricken with a disabling condition, including uncontrollable tremors, paralysis, and then death. Initially, the sufferers were quarantined to prevent infecting others, until studies showed the cause to be contamination of the waters of the bay with methyl mercury waste. This was being produced by the Chizo Corporation, which manufactured fertilizers and had been pumping untreated waste into the bay. This organic mercury was bioaccumulating and bioconcentrating up the food chain to affect humans who ate the contaminated fish. 15% of the population of Minamata either died or were permanently paralyzed, and many of the young women who appeared unaffected subsequently went on to have children with serious disorders. A later similar incident involving the Showa Corporation at Niigata, which also manufactured agricultural chemicals, affected many thousands more innocent people. Mercury is also used as a fungicide on grain and seeds, and in the 1970s mercury-treated grain, intended for planting, was eaten by starving Kurdish peasants in the north of Iraq. This incident led to an estimated 6,000 deaths and 100,000 people injured. The larger carnivorous fish, such as tuna and shark, are recognized to be a major source of methyl mercury contamination, and in December 2008 the American actor Jeremy Piven pulled out of a run on Broadway after being diagnosed with mercury poisoning from eating sushi regularly for 20 years. There is a history of scientists being poisoned by mercury too. Notable examples include Sir Michael Faraday, who lost his memory and had a nervous breakdown, and Alfred Stock, a German inorganic chemist, who was poisoned by the mercury he handled and campaigned tirelessly for the remainder of his life for the true toxicity of mercury to be recognised. In another incident, just 15 years ago, Karen Wetterhahn, a chemistry professor at Dartmouth College, New Hampshire, spilled a few drops of methyl mercury on her latex glove during an experiment. She began experiencing the symptoms of mercury poisoning, and in spite of aggressive chelation treatment, died just 5 months later, aged 48. Doctors throughout history have used mercury as a medicine. Toxic mercury medications were administered as purging agents, and the doctors applied mercury-containing potions direct to the skin of patients with scabies and syphilis. This often resulted in the death of both the doctor and the patient. It is hard to know where idiocy ends and conspiracy begins, but many notable people have been killed at the hands of their physicians using mercury-based medicines. Amadeus Mozart is known to have died of the mercury cure he was given for syphilis, and recent analysis of the hair of Beethoven and Napoleon Bonaparte have revealed high levels of mercury, lead and arsenic. Abraham Lincoln was also known to have taken blue mass, a popular antidepressant made from mercury compounded with licorice and honey. A daily dose is calculated to have delivered nearly 9,000 times the current safety standards, and this is thought to account for the insomnia, tremors and volatile outbursts of rage that he suffered from. A more intentional form of mercury poisoning may have been involved with the English King George III, who ended up blind, deaf and insane, and also the mother and wife of Ivan the Terrible, the first Russian Tsar, who were both poisoned with mercury according to recent analysis of their remains. More recently, Russians including Alexander Lebedev and the lawyer Karina Moskalenko claim to have been victims of state-sponsored mercury poisoning. A disease known as acrodynia or pink disease, involving burning redness of the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet and terrible rashes and distress, afflicted a lot of infants in the first part of the 20th century. Eventually the cause was identified as being calomel, a mercury-containing teething powder, and the products were withdrawn just 60 years ago. An organic mercury preservative, the merosol, is still being used in a great many vaccinations. This is of particular significance as the number of recommended or mandatory vaccinations now number several dozen, many of which are given to tiny babies and small children. However, for the majority of their mercury exposure comes from their dental amalgam fillings. Placing and removing dental amalgam fillings exposes dentists and their chairside staff to occupational mercury poisoning, and they have the health record to prove it. Our long and tortured history of using mercury in medicine and dentistry means that there is probably not a person unaffected by this issue to some greater or lesser extent in the developed world. This is because a significant proportion of the mother's toxin burden is passed to her child in the womb and breast milk, and so the mercury, along with other toxins, is passed down the generations. Although mercury has been phased out in some industries, it is still widely used in the production of gold, tin, cement, steel, batteries and explosives, and in laboratories and hospitals. You might think that after 3,500 years of documented ill effects, we might have learned our lesson about handling mercury as the highly toxic agent that it is. This image, taken from the National Geographic magazine sometime in the 1970s, suggests otherwise. I have often wondered what happened to the man pictured who would willingly pose submerged in a vat of liquid mercury.